Welcome to the latest in our Ericsson UnBoxed social series broadcasts, where each week I take a detailed look at different aspects of communication technology in the company of some of the industry's leading experts. This week, the Ericsson Mobility Report tells us a lot about the mobile industry, from key trends to disruptive events that have impacted the industry. And if you can believe it, it has been doing it for a decade. On its 10th anniversary, let us take a deep dive into the history of the report and look at the latest forecasts for the future. To help me with this, I am joined by two esteemed guests. Patrick Cerval is the head of strategic marketing insights at Ericsson. And Patrick, you are the executive editor of the Ericsson Mobility Report. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you very much.
And Cecilia Atherval is the head of marketing and communications for networks at Ericsson. And Cecilia has a background in strategy, in consumer research, and looking after 5G marketing. And she leads the team that spearheads the Ericsson narrative on the future of networks. Cecilia, we are delighted to have you here. How are you?
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Well, so for the audience, let me tell you how it's going to happen. I get the opportunity to speak with Patrick and with Cecilia for about 20 minutes. But all throughout, we're going to be taking questions from Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. Most of those will be asked at the end of the broadcast, but we will pepper some in throughout. I can tell you that already we have viewers in from Brazil and from Spain and Algeria. So welcome to you all. We look forward to having this conversation. Now, Patrick, I'm going to start with you. This is the 10th anniversary edition of the Ericsson Mobility Report. I thought it would be useful to kind of paint a picture, perhaps a little surprising, to consider how far we have come in 10 years. What can you remember about the mobile landscape in 2011?
Thank you. And I mean, it's a privilege to actually sit here and talk about this, the fact that we have actually had this report for so long time. And the good thing is we have been able to, through the lens of the report, look at this amazing industry and what has happened the last 10 years. And, you know, thinking back to 2011, it's hard even to remember it, but it was a time when the app ecosystem had just been established. We had the smartphone just available for a few years. And, you know, I actually looked up and 2010, the word of the year was voted to be the app. So app is actually quite a new thing then back in 2011, which is kind of amazing to think about right now. And we also saw a lot of new games coming up. And, you know, I remember Angry Birds when that happened. That was a big thing, you know, in the beginning of that part time. So, you know, for me, this time was actually the cusp of something big. But how big, it was hard to understand back then.
It really was. And when you think about some of the events that were happening or were just about to happen and how you were planning, the types of things that you were imagining people would be using technologies for, we couldn't have predicted, for example, you know, in the UK, we had an extraordinary Olympics, and that was such a big streaming phenomenon just the next year. So in 2011, the landscape was incredibly different. What was the thinking behind the publication of the first mobility report?
Well, we had a period of time where we had obviously, as Ericsson, then done a lot of measurements in different networks. We had a lot of data on what actually was happening, and we had done our own forecast of what we thought would happen. But most of that was used internally. We had it for strategic planning reason. We supported our own R&D. But we never externally published anything. And I think for us, we realized that there is so much more we can do with this data. So we started to think about, you know, how can we utilize this, not just for the benefit of Ericsson, but actually help to explain for the industry what's actually happening and what's ahead. So I think that was a starting point of actually thinking of, okay, can we put this together? And we did. But it took some effort to actually convince everyone internally that it was a good idea to release all of that data.
Oh, that's so interesting, because of course now we expect everything to be so open and to publish so much, that it was a challenge. But look at how extraordinarily successful it has been, because it's come out for 10 years, which is amazing. Now, Cecilia, I'd love to hear your recollections from 2011. And also, besides leading strategy and marketing, you're also the head of the Ericsson Consumer Lab. So I'd love to hear some of the insights that you have about consumers, what you are planning for the future, and how the Consumer Lab relates to Patrick's work on the Mobility Report.
Well, so let's relate back to 2011, because at that point in time, I was actually the head of Ericsson Consumer Lab, and I had been so for 2 years. It was an amazing year. I also had my second child. So my recollections of that year is like a blur of, a lot of things happening in our industry. And at the same time, that's very personal experience of, trying to juggle life with 2 small children at the time. Consumer Lab was founded over 25 years ago in Ericsson. It was meant as a unit to help guide us in our development of our own phones, as well as how our technology would be used for the benefit of people primarily, but also the society at large. Since then, Consumer Lab has evolved, and today they are a unit also looking at industry research, so Consumer and Industry Lab. And it's different from what Patrick is talking about, which has more to do with the actual measurements in the network. Ericsson's Consumer and Industry Lab is looking at the qualitative and quantitative insights that you can get from actually engaging with the users to see what they think and expect of different technologies, but also primarily how they would use it. And I think this becomes even more important now as we see technology and connectivity being part of our everyday lives and helping to tackle many of the big questions in society as well, like a continued sustainable future for all of us.
These are the big questions that we're going to be asking throughout this broadcast. Have you been on a similar journey as Patrick and as the Mobility Report over the last 10 years?
Well, I think so, because as I mentioned, Consumer Lab had been there around for a long time, but just about in the beginning there, when I had the pleasure of leading the unit, we started opening up a lot more and really sharing our insights and research widely. And I think that is what we also now obviously are continuing to do. So I think by doing that, by opening, by sharing, by engaging, we can together drive a much more exciting future across different players in the ecosystem. So definitely, I think that is a little bit part of how we like to engage as a company and also as individuals represented here today.
So we have the consumer expectations, the technological facilities of 2011. If we fast forward to now, Patrick, what is the difference? Can you lay out can you lay it out on the table what the technology landscape looks like today?
Yeah, obviously, looking back and see what has happened from then, just to take a short recap, in 2011, we had around 700 million smartphone subscriptions in the world. Most people were using data over mobile through their own laptop or tablet. So a lot of the data traffic generated in the world came from laptops and tablets and from small amount of users. So we didn't have enough coverage of 4G. 4G was a very new thing. If I fast forward to now, we have actually added some 5.5 billion smartphone subscriptions in the world. And just amazing to see how that technology, how that device have been so fundamental to change not just one country, but basically every market in the world and used so much. And we are using 300 times more traffic today than we did a decade ago. So it's really an astonishing uptake. And then add to that the development in technology has led to smartphones having much more capability than they had before. So it's a completely different situation now than we had back then.
Cecilia, what has surprised you the most out of the evolution of this industry in the last decade?
Well, I think what continues to surprise me is how we talk about things for a very long time, sort of we almost like a herding effect in the industry. And then once it actually happens, we tend to get a bit surprised, all of us. So I think one of the things that we spoke a lot about back then was, how would we get more people, more uptake with internet on mobile phones, and we were also talking about how video services would make a big difference, and how mobile TV in the phone would actually happen. And now we're here where a majority of the traffic in our networks are actually generated by video, and when smartphones are the primary access device to internet. So of course, what I look forward to now is that next shift when when smartphones is no longer, the only or the main access device, but then we see a plethora of other kind of devices coming in to enable us to connect.
You mentioned some of those big questions. You mentioned climate, sustainability, those things that industries across the landscape are tackling or are really thinking about. And as we look towards the future, ultimately predicting the future is about how we handle the unexpected. Cecilia, what are the major trends, do you think, that are going to be driving innovation, consumer uptake in the future? Is it going to be climate change and sustainability? Is it going to be things like global pandemics?
Well, I think all of these things play a big role. If you look to sustainability and climate, it's obviously the big question of our time. And I think we're at a point when everyone needs to contribute. And it's not about that, a few really changing all of their lives. But if we could get 90% of people to just do a few changes, we get a big effect. And I think every company and every society has a responsibility to contribute. And if you look to our industry, we have a lot of opportunities to help, not only with a rather small part that we actually drive out of CO2 emissions, about 1.5%. We need to do everything to get that down to as close to zero as at all possible. But we can also impact the 15% that we can see how we can impact the rest of industries and the rest of societies to make a big shift by leveraging connectivity and new services.
It's interesting, isn't it, from a consumer point of view, that this is something that feels as if it has finally tipped, which means, of course, that in predicting the future, it's hard to predict what consumers are going to do. But do you have a sense, Cecilia, of how consumers are going to be driving this in terms of these big issues that we're facing?
Well, I think, first of all, there is, besides the big questions, we have all been facing a very different reality because of the pandemic. And I think with that, people have had a few realizations. First of all, that it is because of the connectivity and all the screens around us that we're suddenly able to transfer a lot of our everyday work life into, some kind of a meet with your colleagues and get all work done over screens in video conferences and connected from home. A lot of us have that reality. I think what that has helped us to realize is that it's possible. First of all, that's amazing. I mean, look back 10 years, we couldn't have, global economy would have taken such a hit if we hadn't had that readiness among us at large. But I think it has also made it very clear to us the limitations. You get very tired by spending all of your day in a video conference, and a screen only gets as good as it gets, right? So I think we have a readiness and awareness for working in other ways with a hybrid environment, but we also, and we can see this in the research too. So when we asked people before the pandemic how they would be interested to connect differently and work differently and have more senses involved in connecting with the internet, there was a big interest, but now we see a lot of readiness too. And a want to see other devices connected and other senses involved than just, the flat screen experience and the connected smartphone.
It's really exciting. It feels like it's been a long time coming. Now, Patrick, you will, of course, have been watching all of this evolution before the pandemic sort of tipped us into the accelerated present, I suppose you could call it now. It's not even the accelerated future anymore. But the mobility report is interesting because it's Ericsson is a B2B company, and yet this is very much a sort of outward focused report. Why is the mobility report important to be released to the consumer?
I think it's important in many aspects. First of all, I love data and trying to analyze what's actually happening in the networks, and also as Cecilia talks about, how we change our behavior. I think that's something that is important for everyone to understand how far we go, and building back on the discussion on our future, especially looking at the challenges ahead. I think one thing that the pandemic has shown us is how fast we are in changing, how fast we can change as humans in different situations, and trying to keep track on that is for me a key objective with the report, and trying to understand that, and also look at how should we support consumers going forward. What's the need in terms of building coverage? What's the need in terms of building capacity? What are the good examples that service providers are doing around the world? If we can share that and actually help others to copy that and be ready for the next wave of new innovations that are bound to happen, then that is a good thing.
How has the report been received? How have people responded to it? Have there been any surprising reactions?
Yeah, we have had a lot of different reactions over the years, and it's I have so many anecdotes of good things, but of course I get extra happy when I hear people from academia talking about it. Even to the point that I actually get questions from some universities wanting to use it as a course literature for students. I think that's kind of cool. But also, I guess the best thing is when you meet customers, you go around the world, and now virtually meeting a lot of customers, and they tell you that they have read all the editions from the start, and that kind of feels quite good.
That's extraordinary. Absolutely amazing. And it is a great read. It's a really wonderful insight into the evolution of this industry. And it's exciting, to see all of these things, to be able to, as you say, have the data and just to make that available. Now, on Wednesday, the 100th live network was announced. What have you learned from working with operators globally? Patrick, I'd love you to take this one.
Yeah, sure. I would love for Cecilia to add it as well. But when we are working with operators, we are also seeing the need to educate themselves or educate us and help each other in the industry to actually see what can be better, what can be done, and so on. So, the more we see operators launching 5G, the more we're seeing the take-up happening. I think that is a good thing that we are trying to keep track on and see how they will use that. Right now, the coverage in the world, the population coverage in the world for 5G is going to be close to 25% in the end of this year, meaning that around 2 billion people will live in areas where they have 5G coverage. That is going to quickly grow up to a number of 75% by 2027. So the more years to come here, the more people will actually live in 5G coverage areas. And I think 5G has that potential of actually giving much more innovation power, not just for the industry itself, but for so many other players in the ecosystem, so many other industries. So it will, find a place where so many others will rely on that development. So I think that is super interesting to see.
It is exciting, Cecilia, 100th network going online. Tell me a little bit about how you're imagining that consumers are going to bring this on board and really start to innovate within this new connectivity space.
Well, first of all, I think that if you look back to those 10 years ago and how we argued the smartphone would change it all, I think we are now at a time where we get the question from operators and also from some consumers wondering what will be different with 5G. And of course, it's a lot bigger in terms of the speed that you can get and the experience that you can get. But I think that we have yet to see the big shift. And I think it's when you have the combinatorial effects of a lot of new different technologies coming into play, and a lot of people from different backgrounds and experience to pull through on the new kind of innovation. So I'm almost like I'm eager to look beyond the smartphone era and really try and work across the ecosystem to get to the full power of limitless connectivity combined with AI and cloud and IoT and a whole range of new devices and new kind of services. We already see from consumers a lot of interest in immersive media. So if video was changing the world then 10 years ago, imagine what you can do with different kinds of video services now when it becomes with augmented reality, virtual reality, an extension of our reality, actually. So over time, I think we will see the total blend of the physical and the virtual world. And for that to happen, you need other kinds of devices and you need a lot more senses involved as well.
If I
It's
can add a
interesting. Oh, please, Patrick. Yes.
Yeah, because it's interesting also to look in the history books a little bit to see what happened on 4G, because when 4G had been around 4 to 5 years, that's when a lot of the new innovation happened, the mass uptake of new users, the new business models from service providers, new entrants coming into the market, and a lot of new technology into the smartphones. And as Cecilia says, that is bound to happen now as well. So I would expect that when we get into the mid 2020s, then we're going to see a lot of these things happening. So I really look forward to that.
And it's also quite exciting because it's difficult to anticipate how it is actually going to roll out, isn't it? You can create the facilities, can't you? And this is something that is highlighted in the report. You can create the facilities, the landscape, but how people are going to use it, if you build it, they will come, but you don't know what they're going to do with it. Isn't that right, Cecilia?
Right, exactly. And that's why I sometimes almost can get a bit tired when I get the question, what is the killer app for 5G? It's not going to be a killer app. It is really that, again, the combinatorial effects, everything coming together. I think we will see, and we are already starting to see a lot of new innovative services coming into play.
Carl asks, and this is from one of our viewers. Carl asks, when we look to the future, do we see any part of the world leading tech? So, for example, when it comes to 5G or AI. Patrick, have you seen any particular territory really moving forward in an interesting and innovative way?
There are a few markets that are ahead in terms of rolling out 5G and testing out. I think that we will see more and more coming, but of course you can look at the countries like South Korea that have been early on 5G, but regions like North America, Western Europe, but also Northeast Asia is also on the move in terms of building out 5G quickly. And we believe all these markets will have over 70 to 80% share of subscriptions in 2027 being 5G. And then there are more markets, but it's hard to generalize, because in every region there are some countries that are very far advanced and other countries that are not. So it's a blend, of course.
Yeah. And everybody will be bringing everybody up together.
It's when you bring the best out of the different markets experiences, right? So we can not only, of course, we would look to the Silicon Valley, but that's not all. I think there are amazing things happening in Asia, also from a cultural perspective in terms of how the services are used. That's going to, help us all evolve.
Absolutely. Thinking back to 2011, we were all looking to South Korea because of the fact that they were all connected to see what the future would hold. And of course, now there are lots and lots of different territories that are sprinting ahead. So it'll be super exciting to see how people adapt to what we're dealing with, what we're doing in everyday life today. I want to briefly, before we move to the questions that are coming in from Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, I have a quick question, deep diving into the report, Patrick. Are there any areas that are particularly surprising? Anything about looking back, 4G was the technology that you were tracking over the last 10 years. Any lessons that you can apply to now us moving into the 5G world that you have seen through the trends that have come across in the report?
Yeah, and if we look back and see what we actually forecasted back in 2011 and what happened, it was easy to see that in the early years we were actually thinking that there would be much more connected laptops over mobile networks with mobile broadband modules inserted in them. That didn't happen. The smartphone came and actually became the tethering device where you actually could connect via Wi-Fi to your laptop or to your tablet. On the other hand, we did see the smartphone and 4G growth, but we underestimated the power of it and how fast it would come. Fast forwarding a few years, in the middle of around 2015, when we looked at what would happen now, I think we got the smartphones right. We actually had the right model and right forecasting for amount of smartphones that would be in the world today, around 6.4 billion. We also more or less got the traffic right, but what we didn't see was a lot of new innovation happening on top of it in terms of new business models, new network entrants or operators that actually started up, and also the acceleration of the 5G standard that happened. So those things were things that we didn't see. So it's almost like a first phase of installation where you're actually deploying the technology, and a second phase where you actually are using it in so many different ways. I mean, little we think that we would actually use the phone to pay things with, and to use it for taking pictures on QR codes and getting into a web page. There's so many things that we're doing now just automatically with the phone that we couldn't think about 10 years ago. So I would expect that is actually what will happen also for 5G, that we will have a phase here where we install the new technology, we're making it available, we get the new devices up, but then everything can happen, and definitely moving into other industries where 5G also is designed to do a really good job to help manufacturing, mining, ports, all of these type of segments.
Indeed. And Cecilia, I'm wondering if there's, yes, please go ahead.
I think there is one very important lesson to remember as well, and that is that basics still always matter. So when you launch a new service and when you want to bring it to market, don't forget that you need to be very clear on what your promise is to your customers. If you're an operator, the clarity of what you're going to pay and what you're going to get, and then always over deliver. So don't set up a lot of expectations if you can't meet them. And then there are the basics that matter, and will continue to matter also with new devices, things like battery life, and that you don't have a lot of hassle with things. So if you take all of those lessons and then try to build a momentum within the ecosystem and try out new things, I think we will have a lot of very successful services coming out of that. Again, we can't foresee everything, but we know that it's going to make a big difference when you get everyone together and just innovate together.
This is a lovely launch pad then to say that we are now taking our questions from Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. We've got some wonderful questions that have already come in. Piawat asks, who is the major consumer that uses the most data in the 5G network during the pandemic? Patrick, I'd love to hear from you on this. And thinking of the pandemic, Piawat continues, how has that affected forecasts? Has number increased because of that?
Yeah, interesting enough, when pandemic happened, almost 2 years ago, we started actually to do an analysis as fast as we could on what actually impact that we would see in networks. What quite quickly happened was that as people started to work from home, the traffic moved. It shifted places geographically, going from city centers and office places to residential areas. And that caused some issues for service providers, but they managed that quite good. But it was also a big difference depending on whether you are in markets where you had good fixed broadband connections at home or whether you had not. So we saw a huge increase in mobile traffic in countries like India, for instance, because of lack of fixed broadband connections. And India is actually an interesting case because they are continuing to be the country among the regions with the top amount of gigabytes spent per month over the smartphone, around 18 gigabytes on average over the whole population every month, which is far more than I use. I'm not even on that scale. So it tells you a lot how they are using the phone. It's much about tethering, but it's also a lot of video and those type of things that are happening. And we realized also in the beginning of the pandemic that a lot of people started to download games. That was the first thing that actually happened. I think they thought they would be, locked in for months and needed to have access to a lot of games.
A lot of us
I
were.
think that's interesting.
I played a lot of games.
Right. And on who's using the 5G most, I think it's also interesting to see the potential upside, because when we ask people, if they would use 5G, many actually, up to 20% have a 5G phone, but they don't even know it themselves. So they got it with a package, and that's a potential upside as well. And it's also the other way around, that people have a 4G phone and believe they're on 5G. So there is some fundamental, level there where people actually need to know what they can do and trust that the connectivity is there for them and that they understand the data plan for the uptake to boost.
Well, indeed. I mean, that's an important thing also from Ericsson's point of view, how to ensure that the network can handle and can cope with all of this. And Patrick, I'm wondering if there's any evidence within the report that demonstrates, how networks are adapting to deal with the increased update, whether it's 5G or other.
Yeah, I think this is one of the key reasons for having the report also, because of our forecast, we're trying to help the service provider to prepare for what is coming and what the trends are saying. And obviously there's, all the networks are coping in the sense that the capacity that we measure on how much traffic actually goes through the network is actually networks that they have capacity for. So in that sense, they have adapted quite a lot. And there are, of course, always going to be areas either in city centers or other places where you actually have coverage or congestion problems. But overall, there is a lot of activities among operators. Then we have the fact that with 5G, it's not just a new technology, it also comes with a lot of new available spectrum. And spectrum is, of course, a very fundamental thing for the service provider to be able to actually carry all that traffic. So 5G has the potential of giving a lot more capacity for the ever hungry users that we are, wanting to have more and more video.
We certainly do. Cecilia, we've talked about some of these big issues. We've talked about climate change and we've talked about the pandemic, but then there's also the flip side, isn't there? So technology is going to allow us to tackle some of these big issues, but at the same time, consumers are pulling back a little bit, aren't they? They're starting to resist the screen. You mentioned some of the other technologies that are out there in this landscape. Can you go into that a little bit and how you're imagining that people are going to uptake things like AI or VR or AR or any of those other things that might not just be a flat screen or your tablet?
I think some of the technologies you mentioned are, a means to an end, in the sense that when you have the combinational effect of all of them together, you can actually do quite magical things. So, of course, a lot of this is only at the pilot stage or the early stage, but maybe out of our 5 senses, beyond, of course, the seeing and the hearing, where we are right now, having the support from the connected devices. The next one is the touch, the haptic response that you can get from already some internet or VR connected services, right? That if you do something, you can get that haptic feedback. And that puts touch into the picture. But what we also see early examples of is actually how you can recreate and share smell and taste as well. And then it gets really amazing, because then instead of interacting with, for example, friends on the other, in another country over a screen in a video conference, you could potentially go and join and have a dinner in the same restaurant chain. You could engage and have the same meal, and over time, you could even recreate the taste and the smell. And already today, there are services that can create about 300 different smells in the air, and with our taste is actually in a way easier because we only have the 5 base tastes, and that you can create and recreate. Right now, the devices, things are clumsy, right? You have to sort of lick something to get that sense of the taste, and you don't want to do that. But and the things that you have to put on top of your VR headsets and so on are big to feel the smell. But it's coming, and I think this is going to be amazing because there is, I think, some tiredness of only always interacting with the smartphone and the screen.
Yeah, I definitely think that is an interesting trend, and how people are going to use that space. Another element I think that people are trying to work around, so not just the embodiedness of technologies, but is also what's happening on the screens, what's happening in the content. And I can imagine that over the next 10 years, we're going to be identifying solutions for some of the problems that we are experiencing writ large with technology. Patrick, is there anything that came out of the mobility report about that, about how people are trying to tackle some of the ills, the social ills that have come about because of the use of technology, our reliance on it, that you can imagine throwing forward to the next 10 years we're going to solve?
Yeah, I think we're always having our ears and eyes open to see those trends and see that happen, because it's a very important issue, as you rightly say, and making sure that we are providing the amount of information that we have, but keeping that privacy at focus, and making sure that it's secure and that it's reliant, and that you actually have the access to your own data whenever you want. I think that's going to be a very important part of it going forward. Right now, as we see traffic increasing everywhere and we see how that is developing, I think we don't see generally anything in the report that can point directly to that. But what we are doing is, of course, looking into all these different success cases, all these different references that we can find, and we will share about that as much as we can in the report going forward. So that's for sure.
Oh, I'm looking forward to reading that. Cecilia, have you seen anything from the consumer lab point of view about how consumers are seeking to try and change those sticking points when we become so immersed with technology?
Well, I think that we are seeing an increase on the general basic understanding of some of the important aspects around privacy, around security, around sustainability. There is that sort of base level understanding increasing, but I think that we also have a responsibility as an industry to think about and tackle these different aspects. So as we bring forward technology that can, for example, enable the mapping of your whole room for you to be able to try virtual reality services in your home, you also don't want anyone else to be able to tap into that and actually see everything that's in your home, right? Or when you have someone walking down the high street with a pair of glasses that actually films their surroundings, how about the privacy of everyone else that they are meeting on that street? So I think we also have to help to tackle those questions, both for the general understanding, so that people can make their own choices, but also to think about how technology can actually also protect from that sense, to make it, secure and reliable and trustworthy as well, and not expose individuals using it.
Absolutely. The opportunity that comes from these technologies bumps us up against our sort of human boundaries. And so it becomes an iterative process. And is that something actually, Patrick, that we've seen in the report over the last 10 years, how we have iterated both, as individuals, but also with the technology, how that's bumped up against one another? Can we see our evolution through the report as technology has evolved too?
Yes, absolutely. I think we can see it a lot in how we are behaving, what type of usage we do, what type of apps we are using, and how we are actually changing our behavior. And I think with the technology that is coming, especially with the new devices that are capable of doing so many different things, we can also collect data in a new way. And I think that is going to be an interesting area where data is not just something that we get from networks, but we actually can help, especially when it comes to tackling climate change, is to actually enable both from Internet of Things and other type of solutions to get as much data data as we can from the world and try to put sensors in all kinds of different things, and that sensor technology and the availability of those type of solutions to actually be able to capture changes and trends in nature and climate, I think that is going to be very important. So those are some of the things I look forward to actually that helps us tackling a lot of these challenges.
It is a very exciting future that you guys are painting. There is a question from Ryan on LinkedIn, who first has a compliment. This is an awesome discussion. Thank you, Ryan. So besides gaming, has online shopping caused a spike during the pandemic? And how will 5G affect e-commerce? Patrick.
Yes, definitely. I think we have seen that in many markets that online shopping has gone up. I think generally it has also gone up so much that we've also seen supply issues in various forms and ways to actually get all the goods everywhere and so on. So that will probably continue. And now I'm not an expert in online shopping, but the fact that we so easily can do things over our devices is actually going to lead to more and more of these type of solutions and change. So yes, that is changing.
That's exciting. Cecilia, certainly from the consumer side, I mean, ultimately it's a consumer element, isn't it? What have you seen in terms of online shopping? And can you imagine, because there are people who are pushing back, aren't there? How can you see that evolving over the next few years?
Well, first of all, when it comes to shopping, I think that means an opportunity and a challenge for everyone having a physical store, right? So it's also how can you enable some kind of a combined shopping experience? And maybe we don't just have to produce all those things unless someone buys them, just to have them on display in stores. If we can have consumers, we could work more producing the things that actually is picked up instead, even though it means maybe you have to wait 2-3 days, but that the thing gets produced as and when it's needed. I think that would be a good thing. And I think people are, if you mean pushing back to the commercialization and the continued, I think there we are in different parts of the world, we see different aspects there. And I think we have to both see that in parts of the world, people have reached some kind of level where they don't feel, do I need all this stuff? And I think it's clear also when you look at the younger generation. My kids actually have a problem to come up with some kind of physical things that they actually want. They want experiences with their family and friends, and they want things in the digital world. An item in the digital world means more for them than maybe sometimes an item in the physical world. And I think when those things also gets produced with a lot less energy consumption, I think that's actually a very good thing. So I think there are also very good aspects of using digitalization and new tools to not have to just produce so much stuff in this world.
Cecilia, there is a question specifically for you here. What will be the maximum speed of 5G, and how will it be different from local wired broadband providers?
And it's specifically for me. Well, I think if you look today in one of the services that is actually meant to compare these, which is fixed wireless access, when you have the opportunity to leverage 5G in places, remote locations where it doesn't make sense to pull a fiber or shoot the fiber or connect otherwise, we are seeing connectivity in certain places of up to 1 gigabit per second. And of course, that's well in line with what you need from your connectivity. I think that these speeds will also continue to evolve, and what makes sense is to look at the speed in combination with the different services that you need to use. But I think, Patrick, from the mobility report, fixed wireless access is one of those opportunities that you have really studied, as it is one of the major big use cases of 5G, right?
That's true. And looking at the development of fixed wireless access, I think it's amazing because just the last 2 years, we have almost double amount of service providers that have a fixed wireless access offering. So many more are offering that, and we see an uptake on that a lot. And if we fast forward, 20% of all the traffic in the world will be fixed wireless access, supporting some 800 million individuals in the world that will rely on fixed wireless access as their broadband connection. So definitely a future that is bright for that type of technology.
We have one final question that I'd like to ask of both of you. Cecilia, I'll come to you first. Jerry on LinkedIn asks, how do you think mobility trends will evolve as we approach closer towards the Metaverse era?
I think this is a great example of how we will live our lives in a combined world, a hybrid world of the physical and the digital. And I think as we see, not only as consumers, but also for different enterprise users, the opportunity when you make a digital manifestation or like a digital twin of something that exists in the physical world, you can actually play out different scenarios and understand how things would happen. And with that intelligence, also try and impact things for the better. So I think that is one of the amazing things that we will see going forward.
Patrick, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I fully agree. And I think it's interesting. I just heard the other day that there is a project going on to try to create a digital twin or a mirror world of the Baltic Sea. The whole sea, they actually are trying to then create this digital twin of, in order to understand what's actually happening in that ecosystem, and can actually test different activities to actually support and build and improve the ecosystem of the Baltic Sea. It just tells me that how much we actually wanted to do the next 10 years in different ways, in different places, that will drive this evolution. I'm really looking forward to look at it from the mobility report the next 10 years as well.
Indeed. Well, thank you to both Cecilia and to Patrick. I think we can all agree that the last 10 years has been incredibly exciting for anybody working in tech or indeed using it. If anything, the pace of change is getting faster, and the next 10 years are going to be even more fascinating than the last. So if you have enjoyed this broadcast, please keep commenting and sharing. Remember to log on for the last in the current series of the Ericsson Social Series broadcasts, where we will be taking a look at some of the key consumer trends and what they mean for the future. Goodbye for now.